For the first 4 or 5 years of my comic book reading life, I almost universally gravitated toward teenage superheroes such as the Teen Titans, the Young Avengers, or any of the adolescent factions of the X-Men, from the Ultimate Universe to the New Mutants of the 1980s to the New Mutants of the early 2000s. Quite often, making the protagonist or team of protagonists into teenagers was enough to make me care about the comic for an extended period of time, simply because I lacked any great critical thinking skills. As I mentioned, one series that I sought out during this period was the Teen Titans, specifically the New Teen Titans, written by Marv Wolfman and drawn by George Perez. This variation of the team debuted in a backup story in DC Comics Presents issue 26 in 1980. Following this tryout appearance, the team made their official debut in their own series, which lasted 91 issues, though this was not indicative of how long this team actually lasted. In 1984, a second Teen Titans series debuted, which was called the New Teen Titans, while the title of the initial series was changed to Tales of the Teen Titans. A little more than a year later, the initial series became a reprint series for the second series, which was where the new adventures of the team could be found. This second series lasted 130 issues, well into the 1990s. It has been said in several places that the Teen Titans was the closest competition Chris Claremont's epic run on X-Men had in the 1980s, which easily explains why I have such an affinity for this era of the title. I have gone through all of this prologue to explain just how great the Teen Titans series was in the 1980s, and how I'm not the only person who felt so, as is evidenced by the two simultaneous series. So what does all of this have to do with the New Teen Titans games? As Marv Wolfman recounts in the foreword of this book, work began on the original graphic novel in 1988, though I've heard that it began as early as 1986, with Wolfman and Perez both co-plotting the story, and Perez drawing the pages, which would then be filled with dialogue by Wolfman after the story was complete. I don't know when it began, but at some point after completing 70 pages of the story, Perez stopped producing work for this story. Wolfman gave credit to how both himself and Perez were tired of working on the same story and characters for so long, and that Perez needed a break. Perez himself has said that he always intended to get back to working on the book sooner than what he did, but he said it felt like his bosses were sabotaging the original graphic novel by offering him lucrative jobs that he felt he could not turn down, like writing and drawing Action Comics. I don't know if DC could benefit at all from sabotaging a graphic novel that they had already paid for in advance, much less one from the creative team that is said to have been a match for Chris Claremont's X-Men at Marvel, which was becoming a financial juggernaut in the 80s at the time. Whatever the reason, games never happened until 2004, when Perez and Wolfman resumed work on the incomplete games. There was one significant problem, which is explained much better by Marv Wolfman and George Perez in the extra material in games than I could ever articulate. In short, work began on this graphic novel in 1988 and was completed in 2010, 22 years later. As I mentioned earlier, even though Wolfman and Perez both co-plotted the rough story, Wolfman never intended to write the words and full script of the book until all the pages were complete. In the 22 years that Perez and Wolfman were not working on this story, Wolfman admits that they both had essentially forgotten much of what they originally were going to do, and had to more or less create a brand new story based on the skeleton of what they had in their notes for the original story. I believe this is adequate enough to explain any plot problems and issues in general I had with the story of Teen Titans games. However, this does not make the existence of these problems go away. Teen Titans games is a flawed story in the manner that it exists, and while the testimonial from Perez and Wolfman might ease some of my questions I had after finishing the book, it would have been better that I didn't have questions about plot holes and character motivations in the first place. I have known about the incomplete games graphic novel since the early 2000s, when I was reading various back issues of Teen Titans from the 1980s and perusing the website Titans Tower in my spare time. As I amassed knowledge about the Teen Titans, this book had become something of a holy grail to me in the years before it came out. When it finally did come out in 2011, I was excited, but not in the same way that I would have been if it had come out when I was still an avid fan of the Teen Titans that I had been when I was younger. I think it's safe to say that some of my disappointment with this graphic novel came from having years and years of build-up, and the sad fact that a book like this simply cannot live up to those kinds of expectations. But I think many of my problems with this book came from problems within the book itself, and are unconnected with my expectations I had built up for years. Now that I have gone through this lengthy diatribe, I will go into my thoughts on games, without pulling punches or sugarcoating what I feel. And I should mention that there will be plenty of spoilers here for anyone who has not yet read the story. In the foreword for the trade paperback collection of The New Teen Titans, The Terror of Trigon, Wolfman said that, to make a reader care about your stories, you have to make them care about the characters. I fully believe this, and when I read a book, in the back of my mind I am looking at characters, and whether I feel like they are behaving like real people, which is also something that Wolfman said is essential in the same foreword for The Terror of Trigon. Furthermore, any story is about conflict. It might be as simple as two characters arguing over who will get the last muffin, or two characters fighting over the fate of a world. But if the conflict doesn't make sense, or is as superficial as a fight with characters who don't interest me, then I have a problem. And unfortunately, Teen Titans Games falls prey to both of these problems. The conflict of this book is very simple. A terrorist called the Games Master is orchestrating attacks through many of his metahuman pawns, and, according to DC's own Nick Fury, secret agent King Faraday, the Games Master is trying to prove that the United States is vulnerable to attack from someone who is not a country with a vendetta against the United States. Marv Wolfman explains that the connection between King Faraday and the Games Master is based on real life. In reality, the United States government hires people to brainstorm ways that the country might be attacked, and how these attacks can be prevented. In the story, King Faraday tells the Titans that the Games Master was one such person that was hired to come up with these scenarios. When Faraday fired him for believing that the man was insane, the Games Master seemingly began implementing his own plans that he had been hired to come up with. But now Faraday had to cover up the fact that he was connected to this Games Master. So Faraday, who Wolfman and Perez used frequently in their own run on the Teen Titans series, comes to the Teen Titans and tells them that they need to capture this villain and kill him. Faraday makes it very clear that killing this man is the only solution to the problem. Naturally, the Teen Titans refuse to get involved in this plan, and so Faraday proceeds to blackmail the Titans instead of making good use of his time deploying manpower to find and kill the terrorists who are actually killing innocent Americans. Finally, Danny Chase, the youngest of the Titans, who has some kind of connection with the fictional government organization, the CVI, manages to get Faraday to stop his assault on the Titans and bring them all of the information he has on the Games Master. All of what I've detailed takes 30 pages out of approximately 120 pages. 1/4 of the book is spent simply introducing our characters, setting up the conflict, and getting our characters involved in the conflict. Much of this could have been done in a much simpler way. Instead of having Faraday come off as ridiculous by deciding to waste his time blackmailing the Teen Titans when they refuse to help him kill a man, why not have Faraday go to the Justice League or the Outsiders? If Faraday is so good at messing with the lives of people like the Teen Titans, and he seemingly would know the identity of the Games Master since he hired him many years earlier, then why not just do what he is doing to the Titans and their families, and do this to the Games Master? Or better yet, capture and kill the Games Master. There's virtually no reason why the Titans are even involved in this story, other than that it is their story and their names are on the cover. These are just my problems with the plot as it is delivered to us in the first quarter of the book. I do not feel like I am nitpicking or laboring to find problems with this plot. These are very simple questions that should have occurred to the Titans and occurred to me when I was reading this book. For what feels like half the book, the Teen Titans are split up to go combat individual pawns of the Games Master who are all carrying out his plans to rain terror over New York City. Most of this is intercut with scenes of the Titans talking about what they are going to do, and then scenes of them actually doing what they are doing set at some point in the near future. I've said before that when I'm reading a Fantastic Four comic, I don't want to read the story of the four Fantastic Ones. I want to read a story about the Fantastic Four. I want to see the team working together as a team. The same is true of the Teen Titans. Even with all the plot problems I have with the first 30 pages of this book and the climax, it was the middle that I felt the least engaged with. I mentioned Wolfman's statement that the audience has to care about the characters before they can care about the story. Unfortunately, for half of this graphic novel, all we are really getting are somewhat confusing layouts of each member of the team individually fighting pawns of the Games Master. I would much rather see the Titans use some detective work to find out what's going on, and go fight the menace together. This is certainly not something that everyone would have a problem with, but it is something that keeps me from enjoying this story as much as I could have. Even taking aside the fact that there's very little teamwork with this team, I just don't feel like there's much going on with each of these characters individually. In 120 pages and 8 protagonists, plus guest star King Faraday, there is not much room to flesh these characters out. Certainly some of these characters might look familiar to anyone who is picking this book up, but if I haven't read an issue of Wolfman and Perez's Teen Titans run in years, which I have not, then when I come away from this graphic novel, I don't know much about any of these characters. The 3 who get the most screen time are Cyborg, Raven, and Danny Chase. Danny Chase really is a brat who Wolfman admits he cares for a great deal. He also admits that the audience did not share his admiration of the character, and that throughout his run on the Teen Titans original series, he perpetually tried to force a liking of this character onto the audience. Clearly, this continued into the game's graphic novel, and with about as much success. I had never seen Danny Chase before this book, and I came away not caring about him at all, and this was before reading that apparently much of the fandom felt the same way. Raven doesn't so much have a character arc, but is paralleled with one of the pawns working with the Games Master. This pawn is apparently Raven's half-sister, and we find out that while Raven grew up in a nurturing environment with family and friends like the Titans, this villain did not have such a support group and became a villain of sorts. Raven tells Cyborg near the end that she is glad that she had these friends, and while it's more than the rest of the characters get, it's just not much at all, really. She doesn't have any change from beginning of the book to the end. She's still exactly the same by the end of the story. So I feel like this parallel is very pointless, really. Cyborg is the single character who gets a satisfactory character arc here. I remember Cyborg starting off as the angry member of the Teen Titans because he saw himself as a freak. Meeting Sarah Sims, who taught a class full of children with prosthetic limbs, brought Cyborg to a more mellow place where he was all around a friendlier guy. After Sarah's death at the hands of the Games Master, seeing Cyborg return to a more angry, even vengeful place in the book, and then seeing if he would carry out his anger to its fullest, or decide that it wouldn't solve anything, that is done in a very believable way. I feel like this could have had an even more of an impact on this book if it had come out when it was intended. The arc Cyborg goes through is still very well done, but I do feel it is diminished by this book being a time capsule of sorts that has no real impact on the lives of these characters as they proceed through an ongoing series, as it was meant to do just that when it was conceived in the 1980s. After the meat of this book, where each Titan fights a bad guy working for the Games Master, the man who we believed was the Game Master, who fought Nightwing, actually turns out to be another pawn. While I felt it was fairly callable a good 10 or 20 pages earlier, we then find out that King Faraday is actually the Games Master. After reading the original idea for the plot of this story in the back of the book, this is a single idea that deviates the most from the original idea in the new book. While the idea of King Faraday being the big villain behind this story intrigues me, it is not handled well at all. The beginning of the book shows a scene of slaughter in Alaska where hundreds are killed by the Games Master, and a message painted on the wall said, "Your move, Faraday." I cannot think of any reason why King Faraday would draw attention to himself if he was the man responsible for the slaughter in the first place. This discrepancy happened because the art at the beginning of the book is from the 1980s, when the plot was planning on having an actual Games Master who had been hired by Faraday and then went rogue, just as he told the Titans, which happened in this book. But knowing why this discrepancy happens does not remove the discrepancy itself. In the back of the book, Wolfman talked about how they did not want to introduce a new character in the form of the Games Master and then not have any room to play with him in just 120 pages. So the idea was changed to there being a Games Master who Faraday killed because this Games Master had been using Faraday's own wargame ideas to kill hundreds. But after murdering the Games Master, Faraday himself developed a dual personality where he was carrying out the schemes of the Games Master himself. This is all explained in the back of the book and does not count as part of the actual story given to us as far as I'm concerned. I am not sure why we wouldn't have had a page or two of exposition where it was explained that the Games Master was once real and had been killed by Faraday after Faraday found out that the terrorist was using his own scenarios as part of a twisted game against Faraday himself. But even if this had been explained in the story, I still have trouble buying that Faraday would commit terrorist acts against a country that several characters say he would die for, and then he would just go on to great lengths to gather the Titans so that they could stop him from finishing his own plan. It just doesn't quite fit for his character, and it's a shame because the idea of the schemes of the Game Master being a product of a game played with Faraday, that is very interesting to me, but it is unfortunately handled very poorly. Teen Titans Games is an excellent book for anyone who has spent much of their time admiring the work that Marv Wolfman and George Perez put into the Teen Titans for many years in the 1980s and 90s. It has some very wonderful elements that could have worked considerably better in a story that handles its characters with more care and handles the story itself more deftly. Anyone who is not an admirer of Wolfman or Perez or the Teen Titans from the 1980s would probably be better off skipping this book, as it doesn't really offer much in the way of story and characterization. It does, however, give us a magnificent piece of artwork with each page, and if that is enough for you to want to buy the book, then I wholeheartedly recommend that you do so. Otherwise, I'm afraid that I can't say much about this book, which is a shame because I really do love the Teen Titans, I love George Perez and Marv Wolfman's work, and I really came into this book wanting to love it. Unfortunately, it just didn't give me many reasons to want to do so.